He has had posts in, I'll just name a few of these places, The Hague, Micronesia, London, and Belgrade. He is a self-confessed army brat who was raised many different places, claims none of them as his hometown. He graduated from Brigham Young University in Provo with degrees in business and Spanish. It says here the FSI language test unit maintains that he speaks Spanish, Serbo-Croatian, Dutch, and Turkish. Does that mean that you do not maintain the same thing?
I am not going to even try to claim any of them.
Fair enough. Prior to joining the Department of State, he worked for the Communication Systems Division of Unisys in Salt Lake City. He did joined the Foreign Service in 1988 as an administrative generalist. I think I know what that might mean, but we are pleased to welcome then Mr. Dinkelman with us here today. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I guess to begin first off, since there are so many familiar faces out there, would those of you who have not listened to any of my presentations before, either this year or in a previous year, please raise your hand? Oh, good. So this is new for most of you, so I can repeat my stories and lies and not worry about boring the majority of you. That's great. My name is John Dinkelman, and I appreciate that kind introduction. I hardly know where to begin, so I'll just start out, and hopefully we'll be able to wrap all of this up effectively for your informational purposes. What I would like to do is speak for approximately 35 minutes or so, and then I'll break for questions, because I have found in my experience, particularly with BYU audiences, that the value added in me answering your questions is much more than me droning on and on and on about myself. I always feel it's good for an audience to get the background of the speaker so that they can more appropriately triangulate the individual's words, where they're coming from, and what they really mean, and measure them off to sift the wheat from the chaff. So let me give you a little bit of background about myself in addition to that introduction, which was written in some gibberish. First off, I'm a Latter-day Saint. I was born in Utah, but am not of Utah, if that works. My father was a military man, and so for much of my childhood, I followed him around in the camp town life that is normal for most military brats. When I was 12 years old, I am the youngest of 3 children, and when I was 12 years old, my older siblings, in the same summer, one moved on to get married, and the other one went on his mission, leaving me an only child just as my father received an assignment to go work at the headquarters office of the southeastern flank of NATO, which was located and still is located in the city of Izmir, Turkey. So at 12 years old, just as I was ordained to be a deacon here in a ward in suburban Salt Lake City, I left the comforts of a standard Mormon lifestyle in the Pale and moved to the Middle East with my parents in what was probably the single most formative occurrence in my life. First time on a plane, first time really outside of the United States, first time encountering anything that approximated a different culture than my own. Needless to say, it was the shock of my life from which I barely recovered. But whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? My parents became extremely good friends with the United States Consul and his wife, who were assigned in that small city in Turkey. And those kind people treated me as loving uncle and aunt. His name was Bill Case. Mr. Case was kind enough to do what we now see quite commonly in the form of letting someone shadow them. But at that time, for a 13-year-old boy, that was quite unknown, because he noted that I had an interest in what he did. And so one afternoon, I went with Mr. Case to his consulate and got to spend about 3 hours just watching this man do stuff that I didn't even know people did for a living. He would issue passports, he would interview people for visas, he would talk to important people about important things, and I was really quite impressed. I was most impressed, however, a few days later when I realized that he could drive his car as fast as he wanted and never get a ticket. And for a little teenage boy, I mean, my gosh, and they pay you too? Gee, that is the career for me. So I went on in life. We moved back to the United States. I went to high school and forgot about this unique experience of years earlier until I came to BYU, where I majored in finance because I really wanted to pay a lot of tithing as a grown-up and figured the only way I could do that was to make a lot of money, right? And so I majored in business, but I always enjoyed taking political science classes because that's where my interests lie. And that wasn't really work. That was fun. That was cool. And one day, one of my professors, who many of you might know, Stan Taylor, mentioned to my class that the Foreign Service was holding its annual examination. And he encouraged people to take the test for the possibility, albeit remote, that we could really be diplomats for the United States. And of course, that immediately triggered my memory of my experiences of earlier, and it rekindled my interest in doing something in foreign affairs. So I immediately signed up for the foreign affairs exam. I failed it miserably. The next year I signed up again. I failed it miserably again. And I continued to do that for a frequency that we won't go into because I really is still painful for me to talk about. But nevertheless, eventually, I mean, the term time and all eternity has a meaning here. I passed the Foreign Service exam and came into the Foreign Service in 1988. I packed up my car, I quit my job in Salt Lake City, I drove up Parley's Canyon and watched Salt Lake disappear in the rearview mirror, for I was off to conquer the world. And it was a wonderful, wonderful feeling. I said goodbye to the Mountain West and the deserts and everything that I knew that was familiar to me, and I swore that I would never, ever, ever work in the barren southwestern United States again. And this is why I am now in Nogales, Mexico, 60 miles south of Tucson, and loving every minute of it. It just shows you what goes around comes around. So after a year of training in Washington, D.C. as a new diplomat in a course called A100, which I'll go into a little bit more in a moment, I took the necessary training for all new diplomats and was assigned to go to Belgrade, Yugoslavia. I tell people you know that you're old when you serve in countries that no longer exist. And that's the case with me. I took a year of Serbo-Croatian language training. That's what we used to call the language of that country. And spent 2 very formative years as a vice consul in Yugoslavia as it deteriorated into the state of civil war, which it fell into by 1991, just as I left that lovely country. The experiences of that assignment were formative. They were wonderful. They were tremendously disturbing. It was very hard to see a country fall apart. It was very difficult to see fellow members of a fledgling Mormon church thrown into situations where different branches in the same district found themselves on different sides of a battlefront. And it was a unique and hard experience for which I will be ever grateful. After my assignment to Yugoslavia, I was fortunate enough to be transferred to the United States Embassy in London, England, and I spent a year and a half there. Again, in London, it was where I acquired the most expensive souvenir of my life. I married a British woman. But for most of the time that I was in Britain on assignment, I was actually transferred back to the Balkan Peninsula to work down in the former Yugoslavia during the war, being transferred between Croatia and Bosnia and Serbia, where I had previously been assigned. After I took my new blushing British bride and ran away from our assignment in London, we spent 2 years at the American Embassy in Majuro. Now, for those of you who've never heard of it, does anyone in this room know where Majuro is? I see one hand. Sir, do you know where Majuro is? Why do you know where Majuro is?
Because I speak Marshallese.
Oh, Yukwe. So you were a missionary in the Marshall Islands.
No, in Hawaii.
Oh, but you speak, well, my goodness. Well, that's wonderful. Majuro is a small little atoll which measures about a mile wide by 250 yards. We lived in a home that actually was not on the island. It was built on pylons over the reef. And at high tide, we were separated from the island and had to go to our house via gangplanks. And at low tide, well, there was anything you could want underneath the reef, usually garbage, but that's another story altogether. We were newlyweds. We were so dreadfully happy for 2 years of our married life that we didn't know we were supposed to be miserable in an isolated, far-flung place in the middle of the Pacific. After 2 years, we left the Marshall Islands and we went to the United States Embassy in The Hague, in the Netherlands, and spent 4 blissful years living on the bulb fields, riding our bicycles, windmills, wooden shoes, the whole full gamut of everything that life is in Holland. We had our first 2 children while we were there. And in 1999, we left the Netherlands and moved back to Washington, D.C. for a year of Turkish language training, which, if any of you have ever studied any languages at all, Turkish is the worst possible language you can ever imagine. At least it was for me. No, it's a wonderful language. It's very complicated and very beautiful. We spent a year and a half at the American Embassy in Ankara, where I was in charge of all of the human resources personnel issues for the United States mission to Turkey, which included the Consulate General in Istanbul, and the consulates in Adana, and in my childhood home of Izmir. So once again, sometimes you get to go full circle regarding things in your life. However, in the fall of 2001, our life hit a hiccup in that our second child, a son, was diagnosed with autism. And the Department of State, being the wonderful employer that it is, basically gave us the option of either taking a lot of money to use resources to address his issues as a little 2-year-old autistic boy in the middle of Turkey, or they would allow us to end the assignment there early and return to the United States to take advantage of the services which are available here in this country. Being the kind of parents we are, we immediately deferred to our son's needs and left that wonderful assignment in that wonderful country and returned to the United States, to Washington, D.C., the very place where I vowed in 1988 to never go, because after all, I had joined the Foreign Service not to go live as a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. We spent 5.5 wonderful, wonderful years in Washington. One of the biggest mistakes, or at least mistaken assumptions of my career, was that an assignment in the United States would be terrible, because I was so raring to go overseas and do foreign stuff. In reality, my time in Washington was truly wonderful, not to mention that it served my son's needs greatly. I was fortunate enough in 2002, upon returning to Washington, to get a job on the A100 training team at the Foreign Service Institute. This is the very course that I had gone through and that all Foreign Service officers go through when they begin their training as Foreign Service officers. So essentially, I became the boot camp drill instructor for new diplomats as they came in. Because of the nature of my family's inability to go overseas due to medical education reasons and the optimal job that it was, I was able to stay in that position at the Foreign Service Institute for over 5.5 years, and was fortunate enough to end up having trained over 2,700 American diplomats, which at that time was about 40% of the entire diplomatic corps of our country. It was a wonderful opportunity, a tremendous blessing to have been there. And because of that position in Washington, I was able to get assigned to a wonderful little job on the Mexican border in a small little dusty border town called Nogales. I had vowed that I would never work in Latin America. I specifically wanted to avoid Mexico, and I especially never wanted to serve on the Mexican border. And that has ended up being the second bad assumption of my career, because my 3 years now that I have been on the border as the United States Consul in charge of the Arizona, Sonora portion of our border has been, at the same time, one of the most challenging and yet one of the most rewarding and enjoyable jobs I have ever had in the Foreign Service. It has been unique for me in that I have never had a job where I felt day to day that I was earning my keep, that I was earning those tax dollars that you were paying, but also that the work that I was doing was having such an immediate and hopefully positive effect on my own country. So it's been an absolute joy. I will be finishing my assignment next summer, and they will have to pry my cold, dead fingers from that desk because it has been so brilliant. Not the least of which being the reason that my children, for we had a third child who was born while we were in Washington, who unfortunately has also been diagnosed as being autistic, were able to and are able to get the special education needs met that they have in Arizona, which has been a true blessing for me to be able to get my children the schooling they need while I have theoretically gone overseas by a few hundred yards. So that's where I'm coming from. Now, I've got a lot of thoughts and a lot of input, and if given the right circumstances, I could talk for hours on end, but I suspect you don't want me to do that. I'll just give you a couple general thoughts to frame the discussion, and then I'll turn it over to you. One, and these are just observations of an aging, bald, fat Mormon guy who happens to have a really cool job, who's lucked out in many different ways. One, the gospel of Jesus Christ in the 20th century has gone to many different countries, principally as a result of American servicemen who were Latter-day Saints who happened to find themselves there. And Books of Mormon in backpacks have laid the groundwork for that same gospel of Jesus Christ to be followed on by possibly even the same servicemen who go home, get discharged, slip on white shirts and ties, and go back out to areas that they once knew. I would suggest that the era of, however you want to call it, hard power in the 21st century and American servicemen going to different places is possibly waning. But the gospel, as we know, will still roll forth. And I submit that the way in which we'll see it rolling forth to yet more nations in the 21st century will be in the briefcases and, dare I say it, the household effects of Latter-day Saints as they are assigned by their employers to places that yet know nothing of the LDS Church. And as the world continues to globalize, and as civilization continues to confront the conundrum of nations which have closed themselves off, but yet also open themselves up to globalization, that we are part of that globalization. And for every, I believe it is a Hindu temple in Spanish Fork, I hope someday there will be a steak center in the middle of the Punjab. And that the only way such great changes will take place all over the world will be through individuals like diplomats who have been raised as Latter-day Saints and go out on behalf of their countries, whatever country that may be, and live their lives and provide the opportunity for those who otherwise would not have the opportunity to receive such a message, to live next door to a lovely family who just happened to be from a strange place in the middle of the western United States. But they had something different that might leave a lasting impression of them. So, that's one big thought, and that's the way I see it, and maybe I'm thinking too much of myself, but it feels right, and so I'd ask you to consider that as you consider a career in the Foreign Service of the United States. Other thoughts, and just general ones. I'll talk about my present job a little bit in Mexico. The Mexico-U.S. relationship is an amazing one. I come from a segment of American society that, when it used the word Mexican, would probably always precede it with the adjective damned. And when my father would talk about those damn Mexicans, or other people would talk about those damn Mexicans, I was just raised with a resentment of those damn Mexicans. I think it has been a charitable part of the Lord's dealing with me to give me an assignment on the Mexican border, where I hope someday to be able to fully repent of the xenophobia and racism which came part and parcel with my young life. For I have had the opportunity now to live in Mexico, among the Mexicans, and know Mexicans for who they really are. And I have to say, in all honesty, that we are an extremely fortunate nation to have 110 million wonderful people to our south, with a culture, a very accommodating, loving, and hospitable culture that tolerates a rather boorish and difficult northern neighbor. Those dear people, the vast majority of whom simply want to live honest, God-fearing, good lives, are taking the brunt of a tremendous struggle which both of our nations are engaged in against narcotics trafficking, human trafficking, things that threaten the very essence of their society, which they deal with nobly every day. We owe it to our Mexican neighbors to support them in what is an extremely violent and deadly struggle which they are undertaking largely on our behalf. This is a nation of extremely good people with a beautiful culture, which, as I am an example of, truly has been misrepresented and taken for granted by us in the United States. And if you even wanted to take that whole thing and throw it aside for a minute and just talk to a Latter-day Saint audience, brothers and sisters, the 14th temple was just announced for Mexico. There's over 1 million Latter-day Saints in that country who are working exceptionally hard to build the kingdom of God in their beautiful country. If but for those 1 million Latter-day Saints, we owe them the political and societal support that they deserve to continue in the commission which they have to bring the gospel to their neighbors, right? So as you look in the news at the horrible things that are going on in Mexico, please keep in mind that of the 110 million people, this is a few scores of thousands who are involved in this heinous trafficking of people, of drugs, of arms, of money, and that the Mexican people deserve our support and, frankly, our admiration. Okay? And that's coming from a guy who is truly converted from being someone who really, really wondered why in the world we were cursed with being next to Mexico, to someone who's wondering why they have the misfortune of being so close to us. Okay? So, with that, we've gone through about a half an hour. I can take this discussion in any direction you'd like. They've asked me to talk about career opportunities in the Foreign Service. My immediate response is going to be, you don't need my advice. You have knees. You can get on them. You know the feelings that should be coming to you when you make the right decisions. And if something inside your heart tells you that this career in the Foreign Service might be something that a higher authority than even President Samuelson might want you to do, then pursue it. If not, then there are plenty of other wonderful careers for graduates of BYU to pursue and contribute to the world. But in the off chance that you might be interested more about the career, I'm happy to talk about it. So with that, if I could open it up to questions. Sure. I don't know who has the microphone. There you are. I would ask you that when you get the microphone that you give me your name, where you're from, and what you're majoring in, because it's just fun to hear all that kind of stuff. So please, if anyone has a question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Andrew Morales, and I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm studying political science.
Very good.
And I understand there are a few different career paths that you can go into when you join the Foreign Service.
There are.
There's managerial.
Mm-hmm.
You can do political science and become an analyst, the economy, and other ones. But from what I understand, you also can't change once you're there. And I'm a political scientist. I'd like to be an analyst. If I join managerial, I mean, what kind of consequence will that be for me? I mean, am I never ever going to be able to change? Am I really just going to be doing managerial and not analysis? Or what's the nature of the job, I guess you could say?
Great question. Let's peel that apart a little bit and let's go with some background. There are 5 different specialties, or what we like to call career tracks, which American diplomats must choose to take, one of which American diplomats, must choose to take when they join the Foreign Service. As a matter of fact, you must state your preference early in the examination process, which makes it even more frustrating and stressful. Those 5 areas, as you've mentioned, a few of them are political, economic, public diplomacy, consular, and management. Those tracks are very different, and let's go quickly into those 5 just for a review. As you mentioned in your question, a political officer would be doing reporting on either international or within national political events. Depending on the size of the embassy that one went to and the portfolio one was given, one could be reporting on external relationships between that country and other key nations, or one could be assigned to be in charge of a certain political party or a certain region in that country to become an expert and report back to Washington on events, political events, regarding that area of responsibility. Economic officers, similarly, are quite focused on analysis and reporting of events and aspects of the country to which they're assigned, be it agriculture, aviation, whatever the nation may have as its key elements for its economy. And those which interact with our economy and our nation would be very high on an economic officer's reporting portfolio when overseas. A consular officer is very different. I like to call consular officers the Relief Society presidents of Americans overseas because they are taking care of them. They are issuing visas to foreigners who want to come to the United States, but even more importantly, they are taking care of American citizens who may be in harm's way, who may be arrested, imprisoned, being held for trial. Unfortunately, sometimes those who die needing to ship remains back to the United States, notifying loved ones of these tragic events, taking care of people in life events. Happily, they also have the opportunity to issue birth certificates to American citizens who are born abroad. Basically a womb-to-tomb type job for individuals who are willing to get involved in people's lives at monumental, if not tragic, times. The public diplomacy career track is quite an interesting one. These are the people who get the fun job of working on cultural exchanges, working with the press. Some people might not call that fun. I personally think it's quite enjoyable. Making sure that the public face of the United States is displayed and that interactions between the peoples of the country to which they're assigned and the United States are moving forward in a variety of methods. A good example last week was I had the opportunity to host 2 rap music individuals, your tax dollars paying a New Yorker and an Alaskan to come to northern Mexico and teach kids how to rap. We won't even talk about the newspaper photographs of me with a baseball cap on backwards. It's still embarrassing. But odd and different combinations and aspects of American society being presented to foreigners with the purpose of opening up, talking, doing what diplomacy should do for countries. And finally, management officers. Those individuals are in charge of making sure that the platform on which an embassy or a consulate functions actually functions, so that everybody else can do their job, with responsibilities ranging from the mundane of paying the light bill and making sure the toilet's flush, to complicated and sometimes challenging issues of employment, hiring, firing, making sure that American practices prevail in an American embassy. Unless you think that that is rather non-substantive, there can be aspects to that kind of a job that can be really, really rewarding. When one is, as was my case, a human resources officer, to hire women into positions where they would never usually be allowed to work in the society where you are living, to watch a woman get promoted and to come to the realization that even though she was seen as just a woman outside the embassy, she was seen for what she truly could be and was treated in an American working environment with the basic consideration and equal rights that she deserves. And so you have an opportunity in any one of those career tracks to espouse, promote, and advance American interests and values. All in all of them allow you the tremendous satisfaction of representing the United States. But you brought up the frustration of having to choose something that you might not be happy with. And I would be lying to you if I told you that there weren't various people in the Department of State who had sown the seeds of dissatisfaction in their careers by choosing to take a career path because they thought they could get into the Foreign Service more easily, only to find that they had then purchased a decade or 2 of dissatisfaction with what they did every day of their career. Don't be scared, because the same skill set, excuse me, I did not mean for that to even ring. Forgive me. The same skill set which we hire individuals on for one career track is applicable to all of them. You cannot be a successful political officer without having first demonstrated your ability to be a successful consular officer. You cannot be the face of public diplomacy if you do not understand the basic laws of the United States when they apply to hiring practices. It's all one big package. Yes, you run a risk of not liking to be an economic officer, and you need to study those different career tracks and make sure that you are not choosing one for which you have no inclination. But at the same time, going on the presumption that no matter which track you choose in the Foreign Service, you must first work in the consular field to be able to serve Americans in need wherever and whenever you may find them in your future career. Subsequent to that, you will be restricted for probably at least a decade in working in the field that you've agreed with us to work in to demonstrate your capabilities. The silver lining to all of this dark cloud that I've painted, however, is that after you've gone through that hiring phase, that tenuring phase, and that narrowing phase into your career track, once you've demonstrated your capability, once you have a reputation, and once we know you to be capable, when you advance in the ranks, it broadens once again. I am a management track officer. I was a contractor. I did human resources. I fixed the bathrooms and I made sure the motor pool ran. But at some point in my career, people understood that I could do other things. And now I'm running a consulate on a border. And every one of my colleagues, no matter what their track is, when they get to that rank, we don't care. We expect you to do it all. And we have confidence that you can. Okay? Yes?
Mike? Where's the mic?
I'll speak really loud if you want.
No, you need to be on the microphone so they can record your question.
Hi, my name is Justin Permenter. I'm a Russian major
Mm-hmm.
at BYU, and I'm from Tennessee. My question for you is, just to preface it, I heard a story about a consular affairs officer who was put in a situation where, I'm not sure 100%, but I think he was in an African nation. He was doing interviews for visa requirements and for family to come to the United States. All the family passed except for one of the children, who I believe was under the age of 10.
Wow.
They didn't pass because they had HIV.
Ah.
And so I know that the review that I read was that this consular affairs officer was put in a really interesting predicament. It was really hard for him. And I'm just wondering, we heard stories of each of your assignments, and it was very fascinating, but I was wondering if you could share with us one or two detailed stories, or one small one, of a situation maybe that you've been put in, especially coming from the perspective of a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Something that was hard for you, but you had to put forth the policy of the government that you represent.
Sure. To address specifically the one issue you spoke of, I of course don't know the case, but I am heartened by the fact that many of our restrictions for immigration or visiting the United States for individuals who are HIV positive have recently been lifted, and that these egregiously difficult things are now part of the past. Thank goodness. Yeah, I can give you one example that still haunts me, and it's rather painful. In 1991, I was a visa officer in Belgrade, and Bosnia was falling apart. And a very, very lovely Bosnian family. The father was a surgeon who had done his internship at a hospital in the United States, I believe in suburban Chicago, and had lived in the United States for quite a while. He came to the embassy and was, God bless him, honest, which I don't know if I would have been in his situation. He was a better man than I. And he looked at me in that booth and he said, "My nation is falling apart. I am a Muslim Bosnian in Sarajevo. These are my children. If we stay, we may die. I am a doctor. I speak English. I can serve the United States. I need to get out now. And I, as a visa officer, unlike some of those wonderful stories we hear of brave consuls who save thousands of Jews and get them out of dangerous areas by stamping them in and moving them away, I said no, because they did not qualify for the visa which they applied for. They were not in conformance with the laws that Congress had given me and that I had sworn to carry out. And I will be haunted by a little blonde-haired, blue-eyed Muslim girl from Sarajevo who was probably about 4 years old, who I do not know if she and her dear family were able to survive what later became a Holocaust. And so it's not the happiest thing that I ever have to report, but it is what I did. Okay? On that happy note. Yes.
Hi, my name is Emma. I'm from San Francisco and I'm majoring in international relations. And I was just wondering, how realistic do you think it is for women to be diplomats or work in foreign service while having a family and supporting a family?
Well, not being a woman, I have to speak from my acquaintances and my good friends. But it is quite doable. But in my opinion, it is no different than any other challenge you dear women have in the modern world, with that uniform and problematic pull of being a wife, a mother, and having your own career. Many, I can probably name hundreds of wonderful diplomats who are also great mothers and wives. I can name at least a dozen Latter-day Saint women who are fantastic Latter-day Saints, fantastic wives and mothers, and awesome representatives of our country. Is it easier for me than it is for them? You betcha. I am a guy, and that kind of stuff is just simpler for us. And I don't pretend to even understand half of the challenges that modern women, particularly modern Latter-day Saint women, face in overcoming social stigmas and societal pressures placed on them to be everything to everybody. But you know, all of us have challenges in our lives, and I know enough excellent Latter-day Saint women diplomats to know that it can be done. And if you want to see me afterwards, I'll put you in contact with a few of them so you can have a mentor or two. Okay? There was a question up here. Yes.
My name is Brandon Nelson. I'm from South Jordan, Utah, majoring in political science and Portuguese. And my question is whether or not there's a lot of anti-American sentiment. Out of all the places that you've traveled in the world, what kind of ideals or thinking do they have against or for Americans?
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I'm
Let me
a
repeat
little
the question.
confused by that question.
Are there a lot of people that have anti-American sentiments out of all the places that you have traveled?
Yes.
And would you say that it's the majority?
No. No, absolutely not. But I'll expand on that a little bit. Yes and no. I like to call us the Labrador retrievers of the world. We're big, we're clumsy, we knock things over, but we think we're cute, right? And we think we're adorable, and we think we have so much to offer everybody. That lovely quote in your hallway about travel and it having such a good effect on individuals in opening up their minds is extremely true. I think one of the greatest things that I have benefited from in my 20 some odd years in the Foreign Service has been coming to an understanding that maybe we don't have a monopoly on all the good things on this planet. And whether it be awesome chocolate cookies in Ankara, or really cool baskets in the Marshall Islands, or English roundabouts. I mean, what a concept of traffic management those people have, right? But nations have things that they do better than others. Nations have a comparative advantage, and it's not just in economic things. There are some societal traits from which every country could benefit if it opened up to others. But in the same sense, we've got some things too that the world can learn from. And I am as equally willing to share those aspects that my country, I believe, my country has to offer to others, as I am to listen and consider what they have to offer me. And that equal playing field feeling that I have had the opportunity to develop personally has helped me both personally and professionally in ways that I could have never imagined otherwise. Are there people who cannot stand America? Are there people who want to kill us? Yes, and there probably always will be. I can only do so much to change their minds, but I am determined to do whatever I can. And I consider the American diplomat who, if but for one moment of interaction with a potential hostile foreigner, allows that person to have a doubt that perhaps his or her violent intentions or hateful intentions towards us might not be the right thing to do, would probably have earned his or her pay for that day. And the more of us who actually do it, both as individuals and a country, the better off we'll be. Yes, in the back.
My name is Jessica Euler. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm majoring in political science. I'm wondering how typical your career path is in this. I mean, you have been in so many different places in the world. Is that normal, or nowadays when you get assignments, are they kind of in areas where you already know the language? Because it sounds like you had a lot of training that you had to go through. Do they still do that, or do they put you where you kind of already have skills?
Okay. I'll answer that in two different parts. The first one is my career path has been very odd. It's been very different and unusual. I probably have had a cumulative total fewer locations where I've served due to my extensive single time in Washington, D.C. But at the same time, my career path reflects one of the truly valuable things about a Foreign Service career, in that you really write your own ticket. If you are interested in a certain linguistic group or geographical area or subject matter, you truly can focus the brunt of your career on that issue, that item, whatever it might be. Understandably, and this is probably something that you at your ages haven't encountered yet, as you come to forks in the road and you choose them, of course you're choosing something that you like, but you're always foregoing some other options that may never come around again. It's just part and parcel of things. Language study, you can't do it as easily when you're 45 or 50 as you could when you were 25 or 30. And so we try to get our officers into the language groups that they need to be in when their minds are still fresh. Because at some point, it just gets too hard to train an old dog with new tricks, like myself. And so, yes, my career is odd. It's different from many of my colleagues. But if you were to examine any single Foreign Service officer's career, I believe you would find that the bulk of it has been the result of that officer desiring to move themselves in a certain direction and pursuing that for 1 or 2 decades. Again in the back.
Austin Pacer from Locking out of California,
Mhm.
Political science major. As Latter-day Saints, just throughout the world and in any profession, we tend to draw special attention to ourselves or be treated in certain ways. And as serving on a somewhat volatile border like Mexico, has your being a member of the church and also the announcement of the temple, has it affected kind of the daily routines, or has it affected your work there on the border?
Oh, my membership in the LDS Church affects everything I do. And I increasingly, as I've gotten older in life, I have been slow to come to the realization, but fortunately I'm coming to the realization that my religion is me. And does it affect my work? Immensely. But in ways that I would not have anticipated. I find myself, when I work with people, using the Doctrine and Covenants as a management tool more than, say, the manuals that I've had to study for my job. And reverting back to, dare I say it, the principles that I learned in primary to work with people and to play well in the sandbox. Because in the end, it seems to me, what was the quote we heard in conference? That simplicity is the greatest sophistication. And sometimes the easier that one works, whether it is simply with one's employees or whether it is with a representative of the foreign ministry with whom you're working, that we in the United States tend to minimize the value of interpersonal relationships and their effect on professional relationships. I feel very fortunate that that is not the case for me, and that I have been able to work, invest my time, my being into the people with whom I establish both professional and personal relationships. I am the kind of Foreign Service officer who, when I leave a place, I cry. And I hope they cry when I go, because to me that's a sign that I've actually done something with my life. And I marvel at those who could be so cold as to not become involved and fall in love with the people with whom they've served and whom they have served. So church work in those various locations, and good friends, and missionary opportunities, and the wonderful wild ride that it is, affect me every single day. So, I don't know, maybe kind of a soppy response, but an honest one. Am I doing the same job that my colleagues are doing at the other consulates in Mexico? I think so. Am I doing it as well? Probably better than others and worse than some. But am I enjoying it more than them? I'd be hard-pressed to imagine that they could enjoy it more than me. Yes, in the back?
Thanks so much for your words so far. I just have two questions if you could help me out.
Sure.
First is, any tips for the Foreign Service exam? And then second, a lot of organizations value different things. Can you tell me, perhaps in the Foreign Service and working in that aspect of government, how important the value of work is relative to, say, perhaps just raw intellectual capability, and sort of how those two play out?
Okay, you didn't give me your name and you didn't tell me where you're from.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Brad Masters. I'm from Southern California.
Okay, thanks, Brad. I'm going to answer your questions backwards. The organization values good judgment. The organization values flexibility. The organization values emotional intelligence. Okay? Yes, of course, work comes with that, and effort, and loyalty, and honesty, but if you've got those three key traits on which you can rest everything else, then you have the basic fiber of what it means to be a diplomat and represent your country. For without those, you will fail. Now, underlying all three of those traits comes the need for development of strong interpersonal abilities. Many people like to say in the Foreign Service, we're all smart, now get over it. We all have to go through this tremendously difficult examination process, which is rigorous and which does a very good job in vetting out people who don't have those basic skills that I've mentioned. However, one of the things which I have constantly been amazed to see in such a large group of very, very accomplished and intelligent people are that there are still a few who do not understand what I mentioned earlier, that please, thank you, that consideration, that sharing one's toys, that an ability to play well in the sandbox translates itself from childhood into adulthood, and that a lot more can be accomplished on Middle East peace when the Israelis and their Arab neighbors like you and trust you than when you are such an intellectual that you do not have the ability to personally connect. That's the beauty of the profession, in that it requires you to grab something outside of yourself, and that while there are quantifiable characteristics that you must have and you must demonstrate to succeed, there is still that something that relies on you to draw from yourself abilities which, as a Latter-day Saint, I would say are God-given and are developed by individuals who are willing to go outside themselves and look at things from other people's points of view. Really, the principles that you learn as a beehive or a teacher or a laurel, and your Young Women's Award and your Eagle Project and your duty to God, these are really things that are really developing in you that je ne sais quoi that helps Foreign Service officers to succeed. It's a wonderful training ground for diplomats, except for those 50-mile hikes.
What about the exam?
The examination process. Study, study, study. No. I'm an old-timer, and I'm actually an extreme point of view on this. And so I would ask you to triangulate off of other Foreign Service officers before you take this as gospel, because I do recognize that I'm jaded. But I would submit that I do not think you can prepare for the Foreign Service exam at all. It's impossible. So give up now. Because unless you are predisposed to the qualities of reaching for The Economist instead of People magazine, unless you are the kind of person when you get into your car, you, instead of turning on the music station, you turn on NPR or the BBC because you want to know what's going on out there, because you have a true hunger and enjoyment for the exotic and the different and the foreign, and want to take a subject and just rip the guts out of it before you make a decision. Unless you are naturally predisposed to that, this career is probably going to be miserable for you. If you just don't care what's going on outside of Utah Valley, you probably shouldn't be in the Foreign Service. Now that's pretty basic, and I'm speaking to an audience of political science majors, so that's a given. But at the same time, I do believe that the individuals who are bent on cramming for the Foreign Service exam or going through some specific strong course of study to get them into that exam only, in a way are missing the point of it all and might be doing it in the wrong way. I would suggest it's better to take the Foreign Service exam a few different times, as some people have done in the 1980s, but we won't give names, to prepare themselves to succeed on the exam later on. The best way to study for the exam is to take it, and frankly, to fail it miserably, and to get a feel for something, and to follow the adage that doing it over and over again doesn't make it easier, but it increases your ability to do it. Don't be in a rush. If you truly should be in the Foreign Service, The fatalist in me tells me that cream will rise and that you will accomplish your goal. The realist in me tells me also that my bureaucratic organization has a very complicated and challenging process to get into it. Because frankly, if you don't have the stamina to fight your way in, how are you ever going to fight with a foreign ministry over an issue or stand your ground against some very odd, archaic, Byzantine, bureaucratic situation in a foreign country that you must overcome to accomplish the goals and purposes of the United States? So look upon our process as the first of many battles that you will fight to accomplish that which you should be getting in the end. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Maybe just this one last question.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Eliza Houghton. I'm from Sonora, California, and I'm undeclared, but I'm thinking I'm going to be an IR major.
Wonderful.
I actually have two questions.
Okay.
First is, I was wondering what the most valuable thing you got out of college was as it relates to your foreign service career. And secondly, I'm just wondering how, in general, is directness balanced with subtlety in your field?
Oh, wow, what a question. Well, let me take the first one. And I know it's going to sound really kind of sappy, but I thought about that first question that you asked quite a bit. The most productive and beneficial class I ever took was at BYU, was in the basement of the Jesse Knight building, and it was typing. And I took it from a teacher. She was from Hong Kong. She was mean, and it drove me absolutely nuts. But I learned how to type. And now, you all use keyboards now. We don't use typewriters anymore, of course. That shows you how old I am. But the basic skills, amplifying that, to be able to use what one will need for the rest of one's life and to do it well will benefit one greatly. So yeah, typing was the best class I ever took. Thousands of dollars to learn how to type. But anyway, but to follow up with something more substantive, the greatest benefit for me at BYU was not in any of the classes related to my majors, though I was very happy to have taken all of them and have benefited from all of them. It was from taking the classes that I wanted to take on the periphery, on the borders, the poli-sci classes, the classes where I saw something that I thought would make me better because I wanted to know more about it, and they stick with me still. Odd classes, but wonderful because they helped me become the person that I wanted to be. Now, the other question, subtlety and directness? Well, the answer is it depends. And part of the judgment is to determine when a message needs to be delivered and the cultural, linguistic, situational aspects of the message require one to be forceful and heavy, whereas other times individuals will need to be as circumspect as they possibly can. A message delivered to a Japanese individual will be very different than something delivered to a Tongan. And those will be different from an Argentine situation. And it is up to us as we move from location to location to mold ourselves and our abilities to meet those needs. So, on the continuum, it will simply depend. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
I'm sure he's happy to chat with you individually if anyone would like to come up.